They told me my daughter was too unstable to live alone. Then I saw the deadbolt on her bedroom door. It wasn't a doctor's lock. It was a hardware store deadbolt with a keyhole on the outside, bruised blue from a greasy hand that had turned it too many times. I stood there in the narrow hall of a farmhouse I didn't recognize anymore, and I understood what kind of treatment they meant. Treatment that doesn't ask permission. Treatment that keeps the lights off. Thanksgiving night had polished the fields of Grey Wolf, Montana with a hard shine. Snow squeaked under my boots when I stepped out of my car. The moon had trimmed itself down to a thin blade. I could smell wood smoke and cold iron. The house used to be a happy mess. Boots piled by the back door, a paint-splattered stool near the window where my daughter Claire let canvases dry. Tonight the porch was clean like a lie, and the wreath was too perfect on the door. I am not the dramatic kind. I am 62 years old and a retired ER nurse from Billings. My name is Martha Dawson. I have watched people gasp their last words and watched babies arrive like small miracles. I married once, buried once. I drink my coffee black and keep my promises. But that night, standing under the yellow porch light, I felt something hot and reckless wake up inside me. Something that didn't care who was sheriff or judge or God's favorite neighbor on this road. The Hendersons opened the door with the practiced surprise of people who hear everything through thin walls. "Martha," said Elaine, the sheriff's wife, with her hand still on the knob. "You should have called." Her lipstick was the color of frostbitten strawberries. The house behind her smelled like turkey and lemon polish. "I did." I held up my phone. 3 times. "Oh, reception," she said and gestured me in. My daughter's picture was still in the hallway by the staircase. Claire, 21, in a thrift store lace dress, laughing into the sun at a farmer's market in Missoula with a bunch of peonies clutched to her chest. She's 33 now. Widow. Painter. The kind of person who gives away her coat and tells you she's warm enough. The kind of person a hard winter eats if you let it. "Where is she?" I asked. "In her room," Elaine said. She smoothed a placemat that didn't need smoothing. "She's resting." "Doctor's orders." "What doctor?" I asked. "Dr. Merrill," she said quickly, and I heard the rehearsed script, the one they'd been practicing. "Paul called him when Claire started having episodes. It's been trying." Sheriff Paul Henderson chose that moment to appear under the archway to the dining room, as if my question summoned him. He had his badge on, though this was his house. He wasn't a tall man, but the belt with the radio and the weapon gave him height he didn't otherwise own. "Martha," he said warmly, like a man greeting a donor at a picnic, "we're taking excellent care of your girl." "My girl is a grown woman," I said. I kept my voice low and even the way I used to when a patient thrashed on a gurney and you needed everyone to listen to instructions. "I'll see her now." "It's not a good time," he said, and the warmth thinned. "I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm," I replied. "It's time." I walked past him before he gave me permission. The hall felt narrower now, as if the house didn't want me in it. I turned left where Claire's room used to be when she first moved in with Luke, Paul's son. Before the accident, at the old mill road. I had not said that word out loud, accident, in months. It never sat right in my mouth. My hand touched cold metal, a deadbolt, stroke blue in the light. "Open it," I said quietly. "Martha," Elaine started. "Open it," I repeated, and the edge in my voice made the thermostat click. Paul took a key from his pocket, but he didn't move. "That door isn't locked," he said. I gripped the knob. It turned half an inch and stuck. "Paul," I said, "if you make me call deputy services on Thanksgiving night because you wouldn't unlock your own daughter-in-law's door, I will stand on this porch and tell the world why." He smiled then, or did something with his mouth that showed teeth. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic." He slid the key in. The bolt turned. The door opened on air that smelled like lavender and stale sleep. "Claire?" I said. "Honey?" A bundle on the bed moved slowly, like something underwater. A lamp was on in the corner, weak and yellow. She rolled toward me, and the shape of her face made something in my throat ache. She looked younger somehow, the way grief erases age. Her hair was tangled into a knot that had come loose and slept where it fell. Her skin had that paper-pale look of people who don't see morning sun. I sat down on the bed, and the mattress sighed with us. "Mom," she whispered, and the word folded me in half. "I'm right here," I said. "I'm right here." Her eyes flicked over my shoulder to the doorway. I didn't need to turn to know they were there, watching us through a door that should never have been locked. I tucked Claire's hair behind her ear with the same fingers that once took her temperature on the back of her neck when she was 5. "How long have you been on meds?" I asked softly. Claire's gaze went to the nightstand and didn't land. A white plastic bottle sat under the lamp. No label, no pharmacy. "Dr. Merrill," Elaine offered quickly from the hall. "He said, for sleep." "For sleep," I repeated, because sometimes echoing a lie makes it crumble faster. I picked up the bottle. It rattled. The pills inside were chalk white and oval. Not sleep meds, not any sleep med I'd ever seen dispensed legally, and I'd watched enough of them pass hands at 3 a.m. "Where's the label?" I asked. Paul answered like a man who had an answer ready for a question nobody had thought to ask before. "We take the labels off so people don't misuse prescriptions." "You know how it is. Folks see names and start helping themselves. People," I said softly, "or sheriffs." His smile tightened. "Martha, you're a guest here." "No," I said, rising. "I'm a mother here." Claire put a hand on my wrist. It felt light as dust and warm as a remembered day. "Please," she said, "don't start something you can't finish." The words fit her mouth wrong, the way they do when someone else taught them to her. She had never been afraid of a room full of noise. She cried openly, laughed too loud, threw her head back at thunder. When she fell in love with Luke Henderson, she painted the sky on the back fence because she said she wanted more sky in her life. After he died on a road at midnight with no brake marks and too much certainty in the sheriff's report, Claire got quiet. Quiet turned into tired. Tired turned into sedated, and somewhere between the deadbolt and the pill bottle, they started calling it care. "Get your coat," I said to Claire. "We're going." "Martha," Paul said, and the way he said my name this time made even the lamp draw breath. "If you remove her, I will have you charged with interference in a medical safety hold. Dr. Merrill documented it. She's a danger to herself. She wanders at night. She forgets to eat. She talks to the wall like it answers back. The world is full of porch steps, and her balance isn't what it used to be. You don't want that on your conscience." "Show me the paperwork," I said. "It's at the office," he replied. "Then you can fetch it," I said, "and we'll stand here and read it together." I lifted the bottle again for a better look I didn't need. "Until then, you're going to get out of the doorway and let a woman see her daughter." We stared at each other through the length of a hallway lined with photographs of men in uniforms. Luke at 17, grinning with an armful of trout. Paul in his academy picture, a man I didn't know in a marine dress coat. Cowboys posing like statues. It is easy to hang order on a wall and call it virtue. Paul moved a fraction, as if he meant to step aside and changed his mind. "Elaine," he said without looking at me, "get Martha a plate to take home." "Paul," I said, "I asked for space, not turkey." He widened his stance. The badge winked. The house grew small around him. "You take another step," he said softly, "and I'll call it trespassing." "What would you call a deadbolt on a bedroom door?" I asked. "Safety," he said. "Look it up." "You're retired, remember? There are moments when you learn a language you never meant to learn. That night I learned Henderson. He was saying he could make a phone call I could not. He was saying the judge owed him a favor, and the hospital owed the judge, and the pharmacy owed the hospital, and so on until the end of the rope. He was saying you can be right and still lose when the other man owns the map. I stood anyway. "Claire," I said, "I will be back in the morning. Have your bag ready." When I stepped onto the porch, the cold hit my teeth. I stood under the porch light and dialed anyway because you dial. The number rang to a desk that didn't answer after hours, not on Thanksgiving, and the recording sounded cheerful and wrong. I hung up and stared down the road where the tire tracks turned dark and then disappeared into the shine of the highway. I was 4 hours from my apartment and 20 feet from my daughter, and both distances felt the same. A truck pulled into the gravel and stopped with its engine low and reluctant. Deputy Kyle Whitner slid out and shut the door with the care of a man who doesn't want to wake a sleeping dog. He was Paul's nephew by marriage, 28, with a face that tried to tell the truth even when his mouth was careful. "Evening, Ms. Dawson," he said, and his breath made little clouds. "You working the holiday?" I asked. He nodded toward the house. "Family call." "I didn't make it," I said. He leaned his elbows on the porch rail the way boys do when they don't know what to do with their hands. He watched the drift gather at the steps. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice turned lower. "Just go home for tonight." "Is that the official recommendation of the Ravine County Sheriff's Office?" I asked. "No, ma'am," he said. "It's my own. Don't make him show off, not with the neighbors watching and the road icy." "He likes the stage." "That I know," I said. He looked at the window light as if it could see him back. "She'll be okay tonight," he said. "He won't push it with you right outside." "I have spent too many nights listening outside doors that should never have been closed," I said. "But I take your meaning." I studied his face. He wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a heartbeat at a time. That can mean a man is lying. It can also mean he's telling himself a story about what he will do when the time comes. "Kyle," I said, "if you ever need a witness, I was here." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." I drove to the Pine Cone Diner because of the coffee. Colleen behind the counter poured it like medicine and called me honey like we had always known each other. Old men at the bar watched the game replay and talked about weather like it was a person who might walk in. I sat in a corner booth and pretended to see the pie case. What I saw was the deadbolt. A man with a reporter's notebook slid into the booth across from me like a question mark with boots. "Ms. Dawson?" he asked. "Dylan Hart, Grey Wolf Gazette." He waited for me to tell him to go. I didn't. "Heard you were in town." "That fast?" "This town moves faster on gossip than on plows," he said, and offered a small grin that did not expect company. "Your daughter, there have been rumors." "There have been worse than rumors," I said. "Which one are you here for?" He closed the notebook. "The truth," he said, and it felt pretentious, but he said it without the flourish of a man who has ever held power, so I let it live. "Truth is, Claire's door has a deadbolt on it," I said. "Truth is, Paul Henderson says it's for safety." Dylan's eyes sharpened. "You'll go on record with that?" "No," I said. "Not yet." I sipped my coffee and let the heat remind me what waking up feels like. "But I will tell you this much. I'm here to take my daughter home. In the morning, after the roads sand over and the sun comes up, I will knock again. If he doesn't open that door, the whole county will hear me." Dylan slid his card across the table. "Call me either way, Fing," he said. I didn't sleep. I sat at the motel desk and wrote down everything I remembered in a nurse's block letters. Time, temperature, words, what bottle, what color, what label wasn't there. It's a habit I never lost. This business of pinning down facts like moths. Toward dawn, I stood and stretched, and the cold creaked in the board under the window. The sun came out slow and shy, and I drove back down Old Mill Road. The second day is harder. The first day, you have righteousness. The second day, you have to knock again and say the same things and let the fight become routine. And that's when they win if you let them. I had no appetite for routine. Paul opened the door like a man who had slept well. He stepped aside without being asked and called down the hall. "Claire, your mother's here." He said it like we were the calmest family in Ravine County. Claire was sitting on the edge of the bed when I walked in. Her hair was combed. Her eyes had more color. She wore a blue sweater I remembered hemming last winter. It hung on her different now, the way clothes hang when you forget your body. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked. She looked at the nightstand. The bottle was gone. Paul leaned his shoulder against the doorframe like a man waiting for an elevator. "We talked," he said. Claire flinched, then found my face again. "I'm not feeling well enough to drive anywhere." "I'll drive," I said. "I'm tired," she said. "We can be tired together," I said. She shook her head slowly. Not today. I knew that look. It was the look of someone whose choices had narrowed invisibly until they were the width of a needle. I also knew forcing her would hand Paul a word he could use later: interference, agitation, instability. I smiled, and it took work. "Okay," I said. "I'll bring soup for dinner. Homemade. You won't even have to heat it." "Thank you," she said, in that voice people use when the polite thing is the only thing standing between them and nothing. I walked out past the photographs, past the smell of lemon polish. On the porch, I stood too long and stared too hard. Paul closed the door gently, and the click had the finality of a gavel. That afternoon, I bought a legal pad and a 3-ring binder at the drugstore that also sold barbecue sauce and deer tags. I called my old friend Sarah Pike, who had left nursing for law after her back gave out. "I need to know what a medical safety hold really looks like in Ravine County," I said. "I need the law, not the legend." "That's dangerous territory," she said. "You're picking a fight with a man who's never lost one because he picks them on his own porch." "You ever seen me pick a fight I didn't intend to finish?" I asked. She sighed. "You gather and I'll read. Paper beats swagger, if you have enough of it." By dusk, my binder had tabs: medical, legal, financial, witness. A nurse's heart will do that to you. We stack the chaos and call it readiness. I was walking out of the motel office when a truck eased into the lot and parked under the only working streetlight. Deputy Kyle got out with his shoulders hunched like he owed the sky something. "Can't stay long," he said without greeting. "I've got coffee," I said. "No cream." "That'll do." He followed me into the room and shut the door like a man shutting out weather. He didn't sit. He handed me a flash drive the way a man hands off dynamite. "I shouldn't have this, Majtes," he said. "I shouldn't even touch it." "But there are things: radio calls, roster logs, a patrol report that got rewritten, a ledger photo from the benevolent fund. There's a recording, too." "What kind of recording?" He stared at the wall behind me. "He thinks the mic on his office camera doesn't keep audio when it records locally." "It does." "You went into the system," I said. He laughed once without humor. "No. The system came to me when he asked me to delete something he said. That's when I learned where the recordings live. I took a copy before I erased the original. What did he say?" Kyle closed his eyes for a moment and chose the right words instead of the angry ones. He said Claire was going to be unavailable long enough for the trustee to move funds without her signature. He said the town doesn't need another artist on a soapbox grieving on Facebook. He said we do what's necessary to keep things orderly. I looked down at the drive in my hand. It was just plastic and possibility. "There's a trustee?" "His brother-in-law," Kyle said. "Name's Greer, but everyone calls him Sparky because he used to fix tractors. He signs what Paul tells him to sign. There's a life insurance payout from Luke's policy. $750,000. It's supposed to be Claire's with a small scholarship fund. You can guess which part he likes to talk about." I felt my jaw tighten until my teeth ached. "And Dr. Merrill? Where does he fit?" Kyle's mouth turned down in the middle. "Clinic on South Street. He writes scripts and takes cash for neighbors. Not enough to get attention, but enough to make him useful. He owes Paul 3 favors, maybe 4. I rubbed my thumb across the plastic of the drive. "You're risking your job," I said. He nodded. "I'm risking more than that, but I can't sleep right with that door locked in my head." "You ever think about leaving?" I asked. He swallowed. "Every day." Then I remember my mother's house sits under his patrol routes, and I think I can't go until I know she's safe. "Then you'll stay until this is over," I said, and he looked relieved that someone had said it out loud. He left as quietly as he came. After the door snicked shut, I sat with the drive in my palm and stared at my reflection in the motel mirror. I looked like a woman who had spent her life taking pulses and suddenly found her own heart thundering against the quiet. I called Sarah. "We have audio," I said, "and a ledger." "Chain of custody?" she asked. "I have the deputy," I said. "That'll do for now," she replied. "But Martha, you know they'll call it inadmissible if it's recorded without consent." "I know," I said. I wasn't thinking courtroom. I was thinking town hall. "You are going to get me disbarred by association," she sighed, "and I will thank you for it when we're done." The next day, I went to church. I have always believed that if you want to find truth in a small town, you go to the places where people let their shoulders down. Churches, diners, the feed co-op near the loading dock. Reverend Amy Klein had a voice like a cello and hands that looked like they could lift a couch. She was 40 and wore her hair in a messy bun because she forgot she had hair after she remembered everyone else's needs. We had met once at a hospital bedside. She had brought a hymn. I had brought morphine. We'd agreed both were holy in different ways. She met me in her office where the books were lined up like children's faces in a school picture. "Martha," she said, and hugged me like we hadn't earned it yet and didn't need to. "You look like a woman with a list." "I am," I said. "I need a room and a coffee pot and a sign that says, 'Tell me what happened to you.'" She studied me a beat too long to be polite and then nodded. "Fellowship Hall, 6 o'clock. I'll make a flyer that doesn't sound like a summons." "Is that your job description?" I asked. "It is now," she said. "Do you want my people or your people or both?" "Whichever ones have ever felt a door lock from the outside," I said. At 6:30, we had 10 people and 2 pies. At 7, we had 22 and a stack of paper cups. By 8, the room hummed with the particular sound of people who don't know if they should whisper a name. A woman named Nora told how the sheriff's charity fund had purchased a wheelchair for her mother and then sent a bill. A man named Frank said he'd been stopped 3 times in 1 week after he put a "Recall Henderson" sticker on his truck, and each time the deputy apologized while writing the ticket. A teenager I didn't know twisted a napkin and said his brother had been kept overnight for observation after he posted a video of the sheriff escorting a drunk friend out of a bar through the kitchen door. Amy held the space like it was a warm bowl and we were all cold hands. At the end, I stood. "My daughter's bedroom has a deadbolt," I said, and the silence fell gentle, like snow. "I'm not asking you to fix my family. I am asking you to tell me if this county still belongs to its people." Dylan stood in the back with his notebook closed. He didn't write. He watched. A hand went up. It was Kyle's, and his uniform made the room shift. "I can't speak for the department," he said, "but I can speak for myself. If you decide to stand, I'll stand with you." His face was pale and steady, and I loved him then like a son because he looked scared and did it anyway. We didn't sleep that night either. We wrote affidavits at the long folding table where church ladies usually rolled out cookie dough. We printed out photos of ledger entries and blew up screenshots of online posts that vanished after the wrong person commented. We wrote the names of judges and board members and the doctor who signed off on holds without a calendar. We made a list of who would speak if God himself asked, and who would speak at the town hall if nobody else would. 2 days later, I drove Claire to a clinic in Missoula. I am not a woman who abducts her daughter. I am a woman who asks her daughter, alone in a car for the first time in weeks, if she wants to breathe without asking permission. She said yes. I signed her name on the line that says consent to treat. We sat in an exam room that smelled like fresh paint and hope. A young doctor with rimless glasses checked her reflexes and her pupils and said quietly, "What they gave you is not medicine. It's compliance." Claire cried then, the tired cry that comes when your body realizes it is safe enough to act like it's human again. I held her shoulders and counted breaths with her until my own heartbeat slowed. "Mom?" she whispered, and I looked down. "If this doesn't work, if we lose everything, promise me you won't let yourself get hard." "I didn't come all this way to become stone," I said. "I came to be a river." She smiled the kind of smile that looks like a picture of a smile. "You're mixing metaphors again." "Then I'll be a river that knows how to use a gavel," I said, and she shook her head, and for the first time in months, I heard something like a small laugh. We came back to Grey Wolf with discharge papers that said she could consent for herself and a sober plan from a doctor who did not drink his holiday with the sheriff. I let her sleep at my motel with blankets piled high. I slept on the vinyl chair by the window and watched the snow glitter under the streetlight. which is how I saw the car idle too long in the lot and the cigarette ember glow like an eye that wouldn't close. The hearing came fast after that. Henderson's people moved like machines. There are courts, and there are rooms with benches that call themselves courts. Judge Robert McRae presided with the wet towel of a voice he had used since college. The petition said temporary protective guardianship for medical reasons. The attaching affidavit had Dr. Merrill's name and a signature that did not match the one on his clinic door. It was the kind of paperwork that expects nobody to read it. Sarah wore a navy suit and low heels that made no noise on marble. We sat together, our binder a brick of truth between us. Claire sat to my left, pale but upright, her hands wrapped in a scarf the way people wrap hands when they're not sure what to do with them. Paul sat across from us with Elaine and the trustees, Sparky Greer and Dr. Merrill, who looked like his tie was too tight or his soul was. Kyle sat in the back row in uniform. Dylan sat 2 rows behind him with his pen in his pocket and his eyes open wider than usual. "Mrs. Dawson," the judge began, peering over his readers like a man reading a weather report instead of a person, "you have an opportunity to explain why the court should not show deference to the medical opinion on file Sarah stood. Respectfully, Your Honor, the medical opinion is not a medical opinion. The document lacks a diagnosis, a time frame, and an originating institution. It is a paragraph of adjectives attached to a signature. Dr. Merrill's left eyelid twitched. Paul watched the judge, not us, the way men watch the referee instead of the ball when they already know the score. Sarah slid a paper forward. "Exhibit A," she said. "A release signed by Ms. Dawson Henderson authorizing the Missoula Clinic to share her evaluation. The clinic found no basis for a hold. They found her competent to direct her own care. They recommended outpatient counseling and community support." Paul leaned back. "The clinic is not familiar with our local situation," he said. "They don't know the history. This is about safety." "Whose?" I asked. I had promised Sarah I would not speak, but promises have exceptions, and one of them is when someone calls your child a weapon. "Whose safety bothers you, Sheriff? Hers or yours?" "Martha," Sarah whispered. But the judge was already calling it out of order, and my heart was already tired of order. We tried to introduce the audio. We expected to lose that motion, and we did. The judge said the word inadmissible with satisfaction, like a man closing a gate. We tried to introduce the ledger photo. He called it irrelevant pending a larger proceeding. We tried to introduce the discharge note from Missoula, the list of anonymous pills, the deadbolt. He called it domestic detail when he announced the temporary guardianship and ordered Claire to remain under family oversight until a later review. I felt a sound climb my throat that was older than language. Sarah touched my arm lightly. "Don't give him what he wants," she said under her breath. "Not here." I looked at Claire. She looked at the floor. "People say you lose hope all at once. They are wrong. You lose it the way a tire loses air. Quietly, with a hiss, nobody hears until the car drifts to the shoulder. After, in the hallway, Paul stepped close and lowered his voice to thread it through my ear. "I told you not to start something you can't finish," he said. "You're playing with grown men. Go home and knit something." I stepped closer still, so close I could see the nick in his razor work under his jaw. I once kept a man alive with my hand on his heart from the back of an ambulance to a waiting room full of people who thought he was already gone, I said. "Don't call me small." He smiled without heat. "You have 48 hours to save face," he said. "After that, the paper will run a lovely story about a mother who couldn't let go." "Dylan?" I said, turning my head to look at the reporter over Paul's shoulder. "You writing a lovely story?" "No," Dylan said. "I'm writing a long one." Paul's smile froze on his teeth. "Careful," he told him without turning. "Careers are short in this town if you don't watch your step." "Funny," Dylan said mildly. "I hear the same thing about tenures in office." We didn't go home. We went to the fellowship hall again. We set out more chairs. We set up a little microphone because Kyle said his aunt in the back couldn't hear. We made another coffee run. People came. They brought their own pens and their own names and their own tired stories. When it was time, Reverend Amy folded her hands around the mic and said, "We will do this with dignity." The first to speak was a man in his 60s with a veteran's ball cap held in both hands like prayer. "2 summers ago," he said, "my grandson was picked up for disorderly conduct after a fight outside Harlow's bar. If it had been any other boy, they'd have called his mother to come get him. Instead, he was held until morning without a call, and when they released him, his right eye was closed up like summer storm. He keeps his head down now. I didn't raise a boy to look at the floor." The second was a waitress who had stood on tired feet for too many years. "When I refused to serve the sheriff when he was too drunk, my liquor license got reviewed the next month. Do you know what a review looks like here? It looks like 2 deputies sitting at your bar counting the olives in your jar for 3 hours while your regulars leave because they don't want trouble." The third was a teacher, the fourth a cashier, the fifth a man who cleaned chimneys and said he'd been billed for a safety inspection he never requested. With each voice, I watched the room lean toward the truth, like plants toward a window. Then Kyle took the mic and took off his hat and hung it on the back of the chair, like a flag hung at half-mast. "I love this county," he said. "It raised me. It taught me to shovel my neighbor's walk and wave at every truck on Main like it was my uncle. I wear this uniform because I wanted to protect that. But protection turned into permission, and permission turned into power, and power turned into a habit of deciding who counts. I can't keep doing that sober. So I won't. I'm saying this out loud so you know I'm free of it when I'm asked to lie." A murmur moved through the hall like wind. He nodded once and stepped back. Paul stood at the doorway with his arms crossed. His face looked calm enough to fool a lens, but I saw the jaw muscle jump. He left after 10 minutes. Elaine stayed longer and then slipped out like a woman leaving a movie she didn't want to see. Dr. Merrill didn't come. We ended with prayer because Amy said the soul needs a soft landing even after a hard truth. Then we cleaned up and stacked chairs and made a list of what comes next. On that list, a public records request, a letter to the state attorney general, a rally at the courthouse steps at noon on Saturday, an invitation to the county commissioners to attend, and a banner someone's grandson offered to paint that said simply, "We are not afraid." On Saturday, the courthouse steps were a patchwork of winter hats and hands in pockets and cheeks red from cold. The banner hung between 2 borrowed ladders like a promise. I wore my husband's old navy pea coat because it still smelled like cedar when you stood close. Claire wore a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. She looked small and unbreakable in the way you do when you are both of those things at once. We didn't shout much. We told stories into a speaker that made them bigger. Dylan recorded on his phone because a photographer from Missoula was stuck behind a jackknifed semi on Highway 2. Amy read aloud the statutes that say, who can hold whom and why and for how long. Sarah explained what a temporary anything should look like and how this thing we were living wasn't it. Someone lifted a thermos and shouted, "To soup," and the crowd laughed because sometimes laughter is the bravest noise you can make. Paul arrived flanked by 2 deputies who wore their hats low. He did not approach the steps at first. He listened from the edge of the crowd the way a man listens at a neighbor's fence. Then he climbed 3 steps and held up his hands, and the sound in the human throat that says hush did its work. "You're making a lot of noise over family business," he said. "I won't air mine in public. But I will say this, safety is my job, and I will do it, even when it's unpopular. Especially then you locked a door," I said, because I no longer saved my voice for the hopeful rooms. "Tell me whose safety that protected, the person on the inside or the person with the key?" He smiled like a church picture. "Ma'am, if you're feeling unsafe, my office will take your statement." "I just did," I said, and the crowd laughed that brave noise again. That night, someone slid a note under my motel door. No signature, no grammar. Just 5 words scratched hard into blue paper. Go home or regret it. I did what I do with threats. I put it in a plastic sleeve and labeled it. Then I called my daughter, who was in the next room, and I asked her if she felt like painting. She looked at me like I dropped my mind somewhere between the courthouse and the parking lot. Now? Now, I said, because now isn't his. She set up a little easel by the window where the streetlight made a halo on the carpet. She laid out 3 colors, Payne's gray, a bruised blue, and a white that looked like first light on a field not yet walked. She painted the deadbolt, then she painted a hand turning it from the inside. Then she painted the inside of a room as a quilt of memories, a fence in summer sky, a peony, a paint-splattered stool. When she was done, she signed her name in the bottom corner with a flourish I hadn't seen in a long time. I took a picture and sent it to Dylan with a single line, her door. On Monday, the state attorney general's office called the county commissioners. On Tuesday, the commissioners scheduled an executive session and then added a public comment period because the phones wouldn't stop. On Wednesday, a woman I didn't know at the feed co-op handed me a sack of oranges and said, "For your girl," and I cried in aisle 3 near the sacks of corn. The public comment session filled every seat. Kenny Harmon, who used to coach my son in Little League, brought a camp chair and a sandwich. Amy sat near the front with the church treasurer, who had copies of the benevolent fund letter dated the same day as the wheelchair bill. Sarah wore the same navy suit and the same steady breathing. Kyle wore his uniform and a look on his face like a door had opened somewhere inside him, and he meant to keep it that way. Paul spoke first because that is how these things go. He asked questions into the microphone like a man cross-examining a ghost. Do any of you honestly believe I would harm my own family? Do you think I stood beside this county through flood and fire to turn into a man you don't recognize because a few people got loud? Have I not been generous? Have I not shown up? A murmur rose from the seats. People are not good at being told their eyes lied to them. He gave it space as if he were the merciful one. Then Amy stood with a ledger page in her hand and quiet in her mouth. "We have seen generosity used as a leash," she said. "We have seen kindness as currency. We have seen doors locked with the word safety carved on the key. We are here to ask you to unlock them." Kyle approached the mic next and set his hat down. He didn't read from notes. "Sheriff," he said, turning to face the man whose badge gleamed under the recessed lights. "You told me to delete an audio file because it didn't sound good." "I did, but not before I saved it. Because it didn't sound good because it wasn't good. You said the word unavailable like you were ordering paper clips. A person is not a paperclip. A widow is not a liability." "Sir, I took an oath. I intend to keep it even if it costs me this job." He turned and looked at the commissioners. "Place me on leave. Fire me. But put this on the record so my mother knows I didn't just keep my head down and drive by." The room swayed with the day. Elaine stood then, face pale and mouth straight. "Paul," she said, not into the mic, just to the man she had made a life with. "I'm so tired." The room went quieter than a waiting room at 4 a.m. She put a hand over her heart like she was checking that it still beat. "You tell everyone you are keeping us safe, and I don't sleep. That's not safety. That's fear wearing your name." A sound escaped someone's throat. It took me a breath to realize it was mine. Dylan didn't speak. He filmed and later he wrote, and the paper ran a long story about a small town that remembers itself in public because it forgot itself in private. But in the room, in the moment, words were the engine and the fuel both. The commissioners voted for an independent review. They didn't fire anyone that night. Government rarely acts like monsoon. It acts like weather eroding rock. But they opened a door, and I will always be grateful for the first inch. What happens next in stories like ours usually takes place inside rooms where microphones don't go. Investigators came in from the outside with their haircuts and their briefcases and the ability to look a person in the eye without remembering they sat 2 rows behind them in church. They read affidavits and listened to recordings and put puzzle pieces together that had been lying face up for years, while the rest of us called them a tablecloth because the shape was easier to live with. Dr. Merrill resigned from the clinic for health reasons after the pharmacy audit. Sparky Greer stepped down from the trustee board he had been too proud to be on. Paul's badge did not disappear overnight, but the shine went out of it. He stopped wearing it to the grocery store. He stopped finding cameras. One morning, the county website posted a notice that he would be on leave until the review concluded. The same morning, a handwritten sign appeared taped inside the window of the Pinecone Diner. "Thank you for being brave. Pie is on the house for Claire today. My daughter moved into my apartment for a while, at first because I asked, and then because she did. We shared a kitchen table the way we shared a life when she was small. Passing jam, passing news, passing patience like salt. She went to counseling and came home with homework I could not help her with, except to sit at the same table and do mine, which is how I started writing down everything that had happened to us in a voice I could stand to hear at night. She painted more, not doors now, but light. She painted light the way a person paints food after starving too long. One afternoon in March, when the snow on Old Mill Road had melted and refrozen so many times it felt like old glass, we drove out together to the farmhouse. It felt like walking onto a stage we had left long ago. We knocked because we had learned the cost of walking into a room uninvited, even when the room used to belong to you. Elaine answered. She looked older and softer, and like she had taken a good long nap for the first time in winter. "May we come in?" I asked. She opened the door wide. "Please," she said, and the words sounded like relief. We stood in the hall and looked at the deadbolt. It had been removed. A small circle of unpainted wood told the story of where it had been. Claire reached out and touched that circle with her fingertips like a relic. "Paul is with his brother," Elaine said. "He'll be moving to Kalispell for a while." "He needs help," she swallowed. "We both do." Claire looked toward the kitchen. "My easel," she said quietly. "Is it still here?" "It is," Elaine said. "I put a sheet over it so dust didn't have it." I didn't want to look at it. That's not the same as wanting it gone. I know that now. The three of us stood there in a small, careful triangle. Not enemies, not yet friends. Humans in the long middle of repair. "I brought something," Claire said, and opened the bag on her shoulder. She took out a frame. Inside, a painting of a door with no hardware at all, just light where the latch would have been. She held it out to Elaine. "For the wall in the hall," she said, "if you want it." Elaine took it. She looked at it too long to be polite, and not long enough to satisfy the part of me that wanted to watch a heart change. Then she nodded and took a nail and a hammer from the drawer and hung it between Luke's picture and the Academy photograph. The frame looked like a window. For the first time in that house, I thought maybe a window was exactly what we needed. 2 months later, the review ended with words people argued about in coffee shops. Misconduct, abuse of discretion, administrative leave extended. The state announced a criminal inquiry. Paul hired a lawyer from Great Falls who wore shirts with sharp collars. I stopped watching the news every night. I planted basil on my windowsill. I made soup for my neighbors again. When you fight a hurricane, you forget how to stir without bracing yourself. The night before, Claire moved back into her own small rental near the art co-op. We sat on the floor of my living room and boxed up brushes and books and hope. She held up a postcard from a gallery in Missoula. They wanted to hang her series called Interior Light. "You're famous," I said. She smiled into the box. "No," she said. "I'm home." I held her hand then because there are moments you only get once. "I need to say this," I said. "I am proud of you. Not because you painted, but because you stayed soft. That was the heavy lift I learned from you," she said. And that is the sort of line that makes a life feel like it fits. Later that spring, the church opened a room called the Blue House after a grant. Reverend Amy wrote sitting at the same table where we wrote our affidavits. It is a space for women to breathe, a place to sit without being asked what they plan to do next, a place to stand up when they are ready. I volunteer there on Wednesdays and pour coffee and tell bad jokes. Sometimes women cry, sometimes they sleep, sometimes they ask if we know a lawyer, sometimes they ask if we know a painter. We do. I see Kyle sometimes at the farmer's market buying rhubarb like a man who has no idea how to cook it, but thinks hope might be a recipe if you try hard enough. He works now for a timber outfit, safety officer, the kind of job that lets a man go home feeling like he put a fence around something that matters. He waves at trucks without needing to check the patch on the sleeve. He wears his hat backward like he's found the boy in him and decided to keep him. Dylan writes bigger stories now. The Gazette ran a series called Small Town Power. It made people uncomfortable. It made them proud. Both are important. Sometimes I drive out alone on Old Mill Road and sit in the turn pullout where you can see the Henderson farmhouse squatting square against the sky. Apple trees out front. Fence neat as a haircut. The wind moves the field the way a hand moves a blanket over someone asleep on the couch. I think about the way people turn into their own weather if they're not careful. Then I drive home because a woman can look at the past only so long before the road tells her she has miles yet. People ask me if I am satisfied. They ask it the way people ask if you've eaten at a funeral. I tell them I am not interested in satisfaction. I am interested in decency. Some of that we've won. Some we're still owed. I have learned that justice does not always wear a badge or a robe, and it rarely wears a smile. Most days, justice looks like a mother standing in a hallway saying no. No to the locked door. No to the too bright pill. No to the story that calls harm love. When I think back to that first night, the porch light throwing a circle on the snow and my breath rising like something leaving me for the last time, I remember what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, don't make me the villain because I refuse to learn your fear. I wanted to say you cannot jail a woman's voice. I wanted to say the door is not yours. I didn't say any of that. I said something small and true and heavy enough to carry us through a winter. I said, I'll be back in the morning. And then I was, again and again, until morning stayed. If you are listening to this and you find yourself on a hallway carpet looking at a lock that shouldn't be there, I want you to know two things. First, your eyes are not lying to you. Second, you can knock and keep knocking. You can gather your people in a room with a bad coffee pot and a banner made by a boy with cold hands. You can say your daughter's name out loud. You can be a river, and when someone tells you to go home and knit something, you can. You can knit courage into a blanket big enough for the women behind you. On Claire's gallery night, I stood in a room full of light on canvas and held a paper cup of cheap wine like a celebration more expensive than anything the Hendersons ever bought with their fund. My daughter stood by a painting of a window with sunrise pouring through it, and a woman I didn't know touched my elbow and asked, "Are you the mother?" "I am," I said, and it felt like a badge I wanted to wear. "You must be proud," she said. "I am," I answered, proud of the door she opened. We drove back to Grey Wolf with the stars low and lazy above us and the world quieter than I remembered it being when I was 30. At the edge of town, the church steeple cut a sliver out of the sky and the diner still glowed like a small ship waiting in harbor. "Pie?" Claire asked. "Pie," I said. We sat at the Pinecone Diner and Colleen brought us apple a la mode without being asked. She winked at Claire. "Artist discount," she said. I looked around at the cheap art on the walls, the napkin holder with a chip, the man at the counter hunched over a crossword, the kid in the corner scrolling through his phone, the sheriff's badge no longer a regular sight under these lights. I thought about the way a town teaches a woman how to say her own name the right way again, after years of being called by a smaller one. Claire cut the pie with her fork and lifted a bite and closed her eyes the way she does when she is both grateful and not ready to let the world see her being grateful. She swallowed and breathed and looked at me. "Mom," she said, and her voice carried no tremor. "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, and I meant it. "For coming back in the morning," she said. I smiled then, not just with my mouth. "Always," I said. "Always and again." Outside, the road home was lined with snow that had turned to a ridge of crystals, glittering like warnings that had transformed into decorations. I drove careful on the slick. The windows fogged a little, and I cracked mine so the cold could remind us where we lived and who we were. At a red light, we stopped, and I looked over at my girl with paint under her nails and brightness on her cheek, and saw the door inside her wide open. Somewhere down Old Mill Road, a house held a small circle of unpainted wood where a lock used to be. It looked like a scar and a promise. It looked like the kind of thing you tell a story about when you want to remember how you won. I don't know what the final order will say in the books. I don't know what the column inches will count as a victory. I only know that when the weather turns, you check your neighbor's porch and make sure there are no keys on the wrong side of any door. You learn your sheriff's name and your commissioner's and your own. You write them down and you say them out loud, and you teach your daughter to paint them on the wall if she needs to. And if you are lucky or stubborn or both, the morning stays. 3 months after the banner on the courthouse steps faded in the weather, spring came to Grey Wolf the way forgiveness comes to a stubborn heart, slow then all at once. Snowmelt ran like silver veins through the ditches. The Blue House kept its lights on late for women who needed someplace to land. Reverend Amy stocked the pantry with peanut butter, soup, and a kind of quiet that didn't ask for change before it offered a chair. The State's Review ended the way wind ends, by moving what you can't see until everything looks different. The report used careful phrases: abuse of discretion, pattern of extrajudicial influence, questionable application of medical safety holds. But buried in page 16 was the sentence I read out loud twice at my kitchen table. The department leadership failed to safeguard the civil liberties of residents in multiple documented instances. That was the state's voice. The town's voice sounded different. It sounded like a hardware clerk who said, "We don't stock that kind of lock anymore," and a diner owner who refused to comp a badge but saved a slice of pie for a girl with paint on her fingers. The county placed Sheriff Paul Henderson on unpaid leave pending a criminal inquiry. His attorney called it political theater. The commissioners called it due process. I called it air. For the first time in a year, I slept through the night without waking at 2 a.m. to listen for a key turning in a door that wasn't mine. Claire moved into a little upstairs apartment over the co-op. The stairs creaked like a friendly old man. Morning poured through the east windows and warmed the floorboards where she left her shoes. She kept a jug of flowers by the sink. Sometimes peonies, sometimes whatever the market had that wasn't too proud to bloom in a mason jar. She painted light as if it were a language she'd almost forgotten and was learning fluently again. The gallery in Missoula hung her series, Interior Light, on the wall farthest from the door, which is where they hang the work that keeps pulling people deeper into the room. Kyle started wearing a hard hat. He took a job as a safety officer for a timber outfit up near Libby and learned the names of trees like they were co-workers. Some nights he dropped by the Blue House with a stack of new smoke alarms and a grin that said, "Humor me." When a woman needed a lock changed because fear had been living in her closet rent-free, he showed up with a drill and a gentle way of asking, "Do you want this to open from the inside only?" He never took money. He took pie. Dylan wrote about potholes and school levies and every now and then about the way a town decides who it wants to be. He stopped quoting me because one day I told him I didn't want to be a character in his stories anymore. I wanted to be a neighbor in his town. He nodded and brought my groceries to the car without making a note of it. Elaine planted tulips along the front porch. I saw her one Saturday morning on Old Mill Road with dirt on her knees and hair coming loose. She looked up, shading her eyes with the back of her hand. We didn't wave. We nodded. Two women who understood too much about doors and seasons and how both change when you're not looking straight at them. The deadbolt hole in the hallway had been filled and sanded smooth. She'd painted over it, but you could still see the circle if you knew where to look. Scars are like that. They aren't invitations to revisit pain. They're maps in case you ever need to find your way back to the lesson. As for Paul, I heard the grand jury took interest in things that never made the paper. The benevolent fund ledgers, the way certain traffic stops turned into quiet warnings for friends and loud fines for critics. The cash envelopes that passed hands in kitchens where no receipt printer lived. His lawyer said the grand jury was overreaching. The grand jury said, "We'll see." That's the law's way of telling time. One afternoon, Claire and I drove out past the mill road to the ridge where you can see Grey Wolf settle into itself like a quilt. We ate oranges and let the wind take the peels. Claire leaned against me the way she used to when storms came in sideways. "Do you ever wish we could go back to the night before all this?" she asked. "No," I said. "There are doors I wouldn't know how to open now if we hadn't had to pick the lock." She smiled. You always did have a way of making catastrophes sound like a workshop. I'm a nurse, I said. We call it recovery. On the first warm evening of June, the Blue House hosted an open studio night. The fellowship hall smelled like lemonade and acrylics. Women brought what they'd made in the hours after their shift or before their courage wore off. Quilts, small canvases, poems printed on plain paper. Nobody asked what anything was worth. We asked, "What's its name?" When Claire hung a small painting by the door, people stopped without meaning to and tilted their heads. It was a quiet piece, just a door frame and the suggestion of morning beyond it. She called it When Morning Stayed. A young mother I didn't know stood there and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. She had a toddler on her hip and a set of keys jammed on a carabiner like she didn't trust pockets. "I don't know why this one gets me," she said, half to herself. "Maybe because it looks like leaving," I offered, "and staying at the same time." "Yeah," she said, and bounced her child. "That." Near the end of the night, Reverend Amy asked if I would say something. I told her I didn't prepare anything. She said that had never stopped me. So I stood by the lemonade and looked at these women. Hair up, hair down, faces I knew and faces I wanted to know. All of us carrying 3 things at once. What we'd survived, what we were building, and what we refused to let happen again. "I used to think justice was a verdict," I said. "Now I think it's a habit." It's soup on a cold night and a room with the lights on and people who will tell you the truth gently and out loud. It's not dramatic most days. It's a mother saying, "I'll be back in the morning," and then being. It's a town deciding the badge doesn't shine brighter than a person's name. If you came here because a door was locked on the wrong side of you, I hope tonight you felt it give. After, a woman pressed a folded note into my hand. I didn't read it there. I read it in my kitchen later with the light over the sink on and the basil pot leaning toward the window. The note said, "I took my lock off today." No signature, no grammar needed. I put it in a plastic sleeve and wrote the date in the corner and slid it into a binder I keep for miracles. Some people call that sentimental. I call it chain of custody for hope. The night Claire's show closed in Missoula, we loaded paintings into the back of my car and drove the long way home with the radio low. Pasture grass waved like a congregation. A few miles outside Grey Wolf, we pulled over by the old bridge where kids jump in July and wise men don't. The river was high and talking fast. Claire leaned on the rail and looked down into the black green and said, "You know what I miss most?" "What?" "Being a person nobody worried about." "You'll get tired of that again," I said. "It'll sneak up on you on a Tuesday while you're rinsing brushes." She laughed. "A Tuesday feels exactly right." We drove into town at dusk. The pine cones, neon, open, flickered like an old friend winking. Colleen had taped a postcard by the register, the gallery's announcement with a circle around Claire's name and a crooked arrow that said, "Our girl." We sat at the counter and ate pie like it was ceremony. When the bell on the door jingled and Kyle walked in with sawdust on his sleeves, he took the stool beside us and didn't mention the past. He asked, "You seen the trail up on Glacier Pride lately?" And we argued about switchbacks and boots like ordinary people who don't carry a courthouse in their chest. If you're listening and a part of your life has been held behind some beautiful word that felt like a lock, safety, loyalty, family, I hope this is the part where you feel the latch click open. Not because someone important granted permission, but because you reached inside and found the knob. Justice didn't change its outfit for us. We changed our eyes. We learned to say no without apology and to say yes with both hands. We made a habit of showing up at dawn. The morning stayed, not because we deserved it more than anyone else, but because we refused to leave before it arrived. That's the whole story. If there is such a thing, my name is Martha Dawson. I drink my coffee black and I keep my promises. If you ever need someone to sit in a hallway and say, "Open it, call me." If I don't answer, it's only because I'm driving. I'll be there by morning.